Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the first webinar of a series that we hope that Incubator Co-op can continue to provide. Joining us today are members of the public, but also members of the first cohort in our accelerator program. So welcome one and all. Today we are going to hear from Sharon Ede, and Sharon has been an amazing advocate for the new economy, everything from the Post-Growth Institute, her work with Green Industry South Australia, and when she offered to assist us in this accelerator program, I can't tell you how excited I was. We are going to be in for a treat today. Sharon's talking about audience segmentation. And what I love about this idea is that it's not just knowing what you're saying to various people at various times, it's knowing what you want them to say to you. So I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to ask Sharon to speak, and I'm going to share screens so that we can navigate her materials. So thank you very much.
So no worries. Thanks so much, Andrew. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me today. I thought I might just give a little bit of background as to where this piece of work came from. I've been involved in the grassroots environment movement and social change work since the early 90s. And, you know, I've had failings and some successes with how to communicate what you're working on to different people. But one of the things I was seeing over and over again, particularly when I got into my paid role in government, which was to do with greening of government, was, you know, assuming everybody holds the same values or the same perspectives as you. And I think the environment movement in particular has done this and perhaps has alienated people in some respects, just going by conversations I've had with people who don't identify as green, don't identify as part of the environment movement. So we speak to everybody as if they share our values about this, and they might share some commonalities, but for different reasons. So I was scratching my head trying to think, well, how can I get better at this? How can I not be that kind of frustrating eco-Nazi person at work? How can I you know, improve my skills, but also share those with others? And one of the things I did, I took a year out of work in 2011, which was when I helped co-found the Post-Growth Institute, which itself is a huge communications challenge, as you can imagine, challenging the idea of economic growth, which is kind of the primary objective of most governments in most jurisdictions around the world, is a communications challenge in itself. So one of the things that sort of happened out of that year was there was a guy we were working with who was working on a documentary, and he actually had an audience segmentation spreadsheet for his movie. And I saw it, or we got hold of it, and we were like, we can use this, like we can actually work out who the audiences are for post-growth. And not that we would necessarily make that document public, but certainly you know, to clarify our own internal thinking about how we talk to different groups. So that was where I kind of pulled together a bit of a long and complicated audience segmentation spreadsheet for post-growth. And in that same year, I started writing a blog about communication and leadership for change makers and activists. And it was called Crux Catalyst, CRUX for the heart, and catalyst for change.com. I don't write that anymore. I did write it for about 5 years, and I included this kind of material in that blog. And the objective was to really help people get better at communicating what they were doing in a way that resonated with the people that they were speaking to. So yeah, it was a bit of a learning curve for me. I don't pretend to be an expert in any of this. This is all just sort of observations from lived experience and kind of different things I've been involved with over the years. So I think Andrew has shared his screen, which is where I put this content up. I ran a workshop on this at the New Economy Network Australia conference in Melbourne late last year. So yeah, it's really recognising that one size does not fit all when it comes to communications. And government in particular, I think, perhaps doesn't do this so well. It sort of tries to sell a message to the public, quote unquote, and doing things that way, you know, is easier in terms of efficiency, but it might not be as effective all the time. So we've got to think about all these different values that are in play and how to frame those messages and this isn't about manipulating people around to your way of thinking. This is about understanding their perspective, finding that common ground or that mutual interest and that mutual benefit, and taking the bit of your message and framing that in a way that works for them. So that's really, and we learn through story. We learn through engagement and storytelling. Primarily, that's how we've been wired and encoded to transmit values and ideas about the world and how we change for a long, long time, millennia. So we have persisted also in trying to change people's mind with facts and through appeals to their rational mind. We know that that doesn't work all the time because people are often acting on the basis of belief. So when they get information that contradicts that belief, which they've internalised, rather than actually trying to move out of cognitive dissonance, which is this feeling of discomfort when you're getting these two conflicting things going on, they'll get rid of the rational information and actually stick to their beliefs. So, but the storytelling approach and appealing through the heart rather than the head, which is why Crux Catalyst Heart of Change, is I think where we need to do things. And if you look at examples like An Inconvenient Truth, I mean, we've had all kinds of reports and documentation about climate science. We've had the Stern Report. We've had, and how many people have read that? Like, it's a fairly dense, scientific tome. But then how many people have seen An Inconvenient Truth? So many more people. And that's where I think we really started to get some traction for change, because that was delivered really through story. And in fact, I know that Al Gore actually worked with a lot of people to turn a PowerPoint presentation into a narrative, and that is a real big part of why that movie became such a success. So the audience segmentation spreadsheet is something I developed, and I think if Andrew, if you can navigate to down a little bit, you'll see examples and you'll see PDF of the post-growth audience segmentation spreadsheet. So if you click on where it says PDF, it should link to a document. Now, it's going to be a bit tricky to read unless you can zoom in on your screen and blow it up a little bit. But if you can manage to do that and make it sort of readable and traversable for your audience. Yep, you got it?
I've done that a bit, but if I could have a comment from somebody else as to whether they can see that or whether it's too small, that would be helpful. Anyone?
Yep, I can read it.
Great.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, and again, you can this link will be provided to you. You can go and actually download it, blow it up. I've got it printed up on A3 and the text is still quite small because there was so much going on, and examine that at your leisure. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a sense of this one, and then another one where I simplified it. And then what we'll do is hand it over to you guys with this simplified form to have a go at doing your own audience segmentation in real time. Not an extensive exercise, but just to get you used to the idea of how to do this. So looking at the post-growth spreadsheet, what we first did was sort of, we tried to kind of map this along a spectrum of, so who are the allies of post-growth, if you like, and that's things like the transition movement, the degrowth movement, and there might not be complete alignment with those groups, but there's certainly, you wouldn't have to, you could meet over beers and not get into massive arguments, let's put it that way. So there's this sense that those people are pretty much allied with the kind of thinking we're doing, even if it's not exactly right. And so that was the sort of initial audience, and how I structured this was, first you identify all of your audiences, and in this very complicated post-growth one, we had a lot of subgroups within those, so we made it very complicated, if you like. But then sort of name them, who they are. So, for example, the transition movement is groups like the Post-Carbon Institute, transition towns, people concerned about peak oil. How we want them to see and respond to the Post-Growth Institute. So, for example, for that group, those groups I just mentioned, they would think that post-growth is situated to play an important role in tackling a core belief of our society, addiction to growth, that is threatening our existence, and they may bring more people to understand our ideas on peak oil and transition so that we can respond urgently. Then I looked at alignments and clashes. So, all right, well, where does this particular audience and sub-audience, where do they see our work aligning with theirs or not? So for this group I've mentioned in the example, the transition and post-carbon peak oil group, that post-growth aligns concerning energy descent and building resilience might clash with peak oilers if they're a single issue. So a lot of these groups are focused on one particular issue, and we might clash with transition town people who think that local action on its own will be sufficient. So that kind of thing, where are they kind of allied to you? Where might the points of friction be? The engagement story. So what's in it for this particular group? And for this, I sort of surmise that post-growth can connect this movement to a wider latent group and build the support base. So that's just one example. And as we go down that spreadsheet, the next one we did was potential supporters. So that's, for example, climate change activists, climate change scientists, receptive politicians, population activists. And I mean, there's lots of stuff going on there with alignments and clashes with some of those things there. So from there, further down, I mean, even things like the military, urban development professionals, health professionals is a big one. We had a really interesting guest speaker come to Adelaide talking about affluenza. And the curious thing was there that the two public sessions we held hosted by two different universities, I barely saw anybody that I would notice was from the green movement or the sustainability movement, but a whole heap of people from health turned up, ambulance officers. And I was thinking, that's interesting. So they're starting to connect how our economy is working, the kinds of impacts that's having with health issues. And I thought that was really interesting to see. So then if you scroll further down, you'll see the orange and yellow bars. That's receptive. So these people aren't necessarily what you might call supporters or activists. They're not actively engaged in this stuff. But they're people that are probably know something's not quite right but can't put their finger on it, I guess. I saw a really funny infographic the other day, which is the new political map, and it sort of ranged from people they called collapseniks to, people that think technology will save us. And then someone had suggested, then there's a group of people who don't know what's going on but are just waiting for everything to get back to normal, which I thought was quite funny. So that little graphic, which I'll share with the group after as well, is actually an audience segmentation effort as well. But the receptive primary grassroots, silo activists, so these are people that may be working on one particular issue but not actually connecting all of these other issues, and they might actually be losing ground because if they're focused on one single issue, that economic growth and some of the impacts it's having is actually eroding some of the gains they're making in their silos. So what we wanted them to sort of realise is that if you are looking at this root cause, that can actually stem the loss of any gains you're making in your silos. Then we had receptive secondary grassroots. So this is sort of like idealistic youth, the dissatisfied. This is a really interesting group because, and I think this middle group here is the one to focus on because that's where the shift will happen from that middle, because other people are already kind of, they might not see eye to eye completely, but they are, already involved, aware, working on some aspect of it. But this middle cohort here with the orange and yellow I find really interesting, and I've noticed in 8 years, I guess, of being the person that built and ran the post-growth Facebook page, which is now 25,000 followers, not entirely on my own the last few years. There's been another effort going on. But one of the things I've noticed is the posts, there's a whole different sort of, variety of posts that we put up. Some positive issues, some, negative things that are going on in the world. But the things that I've noticed that people are it's the hot button for them, are to do with work, are to do with time pressure, and just feeling like they're sort of caught in this system and don't know, but that they have no agency in how to change it. So that's just what I've noticed. So to me, that group's the interesting one. And there's, the disenfranchised in different parts of the world as well. And right down the bottom, we have the resistors, as I call them, but you might not want to spend too much time trying to engage with these people, but quite often in those groups, there are always people who get it and who are receptive. They might not be able to say it publicly, they might be bound in other ways, but there is always somebody, even in your kind of, I guess, group of merchant bankers maybe that are off doing certain things in the world, that they know that there's some kind of problem, and in themselves they are starting to question things. So there's always that, you know, breach in that kind of thinking. But yet, for example, one of the things, the first thing I put in this group was non-receptive leaders and decision makers and influencers, and that might be politicians, might be business leaders, might be CEOs, chiefs of staff. And what they would say about post-growth is they don't understand it's political or career suicide for me to speak of no growth, but they are offering other ways for my constituents or shareholders to think about value and prosperity. And they have to speak about the status quo, but they're questioning, I guess, their status quo, and so that's another interesting group, but in general might be a little bit more resistant to any kind of challenge, I guess, to values or worldview, unless you're really good at framing it and you've got a good personal connection with that person. So there's another example on the page. Andrew, if you can just either backspace or go down to where Fab City is. So I actually did up a simplified version of that very complex post-growth one. And this is sort of the one that we'll be taking a blank sheet of paper with shortly for you to have a think about. Fab City is an initiative out of Barcelona which is looking at bringing production back into cities, fab meaning fabrication. And I've always found that term comes from Fab Labs, Fabrication Laboratories, which is a kind of brand of makerspace that's come out of MIT in Boston. It's a whole, you know, global network and program and different things. But fab to me sounds like a completely different meaning. So that was always a communication challenge for me in Australia, where that brand doesn't have as much of a profile as it does in Europe and North America, I don't think so. But in any case, I adapted this audience segmentation spreadsheet to Fab City. So again, we've got the audience and the little prompt question there, who exactly is your target audience? So for example, one of them is media, mainstream and independent. What are they trying to achieve? So what do they need from your initiative? And in that box, I thought, well, if I was media and you know, what's in this for me out of Fab City, it's to get positive stories up to show what's possible and to become the go-to person for prestigious and interesting assignments. So if you are known as the person that's sort of writing about this cutting-edge stuff, you know, maybe that helps you professionally. So what is the benefit to this audience from Fab City? And that's to develop literacy around this idea and be able to communicate this to others as it gathers interest. And this, I guess, is where I tweaked it a little bit and put the engagement story at the end. So what would your audience, so whether that's investors or potential residents or elected members, what would your audience say to others about why they should get involved? So that's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to think about things from their perspective. So you've identified in the third column the benefit. So what is the benefit to that audience? And then what would you want them to say to others about Chooks or about Verge or about, you know, any of the initiatives that we've got involved in this first cohort? So what would you want all these different audiences to say about what you're doing? If they're going to carry your message and be an advocate, giving them the ability to communicate that so that it's relevant to their kind of field of expertise, I suppose. So, you know, it's working in government. If you can't say something in 3/4 of a page of dot points, no one's going to pay any attention. So it has to be very succinct, you know, and you've got to be able to communicate quickly and deeply what something is so that someone can grasp it. So from my point of view, trying to talk to people in government, how does it relate to their business plan, the portfolio objectives, ministerial priorities, and can I say it in 3 paragraphs, because otherwise, you know, people's attention's moved on. So it's about understanding your audience. So that's probably enough talking from me for the time being, but what I did think you might like to do, and I know Andrew wanted to, or Wardy wanted to do, maybe go through this online so that, you know, he's doing it for Incubator Co-op itself, is there's a blank audience segmentation worksheet under both of those examples on the web page that he's been screen sharing. And so now you can sort of try this yourself. So if you can open up that document, even if you can't download the page at the moment or print it, don't worry, because there's only 4 columns, which are audience name. So have a bit of a think about who exactly your target audience is. And if you're saying everybody, no, it's like I said before, potential residents, it might be investors, it might be whoever you need to influence to get on board with your initiative because you need their help or you need their backing. Identify who they are. You might come up with 3, you might come up with 12, you might come up with 1 or 2 now and then think of more as your brain starts to sort of ponder this. So don't worry about getting all of them at the moment, just 1 or 2 is enough. So your audience, what are they trying to achieve? So what do they need from your initiative? The benefits, what valuable outcome can this audience expect from your offering, and the engagement story. What would your audience say to others about why they should get involved? So that's enough talking from me at the moment. I'm happy to take any questions before we start people sort of thinking about this and trying to fill in some blanks for themselves. Is that all fairly clear, or are there questions at this point?
Sharon, that was amazing. Thank you for that. I'm going to, as we suggested, run a Google Sheet simultaneously and put those questions in there. And I think we should allow for a bit of time. I will post the URL, Debbie, for audience segmentation in the chat. And let's rejoin at 12:35 and have some questions from people that they get in the next 10 minutes. Otherwise, enjoy watching the screen. And thank you, Sharon.
That's okay. All right, so I can't see the screen, so do you need me to stay on the line and when you've got questions?
Please stay on the line, and then if a question comes through, I'll let you know. Otherwise, I'm going to be engaging in it myself. So.
Great. Okay. Yeah. It's actually one of those things where you look at it and go, oh, of course that makes sense, and that's really easy. When you start actually trying to fill it out, it can be quite hard. So it really forces you and challenges you to go, okay, I'm doing this because of these reasons, but somebody else is doing this for other reasons. And I've had all these kind of interesting debates with some of my friends online who don't identify as green, are really turned off by the green label. But if you post anything about waste issues, especially wasted food, boy, do they get upset. And then I kind of had a little bit of a dig at them one time. I said, I see maybe you've turned into a greenie now, just sort of having a bit of a joke with my friend. And he said, I'm not a greenie, I just hate waste. So all of these kinds of labels and perceptions come into play. And this is really about challenging your own perspective, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and being able to empathise with their perspective and their interests and articulate them. And when they feel heard, when they feel like you know where they're coming from, you're more likely to get a productive, positive relationship with them. So with that, I'll leave it to you to get on and have a crack. And I'm happy to, I'll sit here until 12:30. And if there's any questions while we're doing this, I'm quite happy to try and help answer them if I can.
All right. Sharon, thank you for bearing with us.
No worries.
I know for myself, I just experienced like having to list 10 or more, and probably closer to 17 rows here of stakeholders that I hadn't identified, and they all do need a different message, don't they? And they are going to resonate with different things. This is really valuable. I guess I can't expect to complete this now, and I doubt.
Oh no, you won't. You won't. This is just to kickstart your thinking and to get perhaps a couple of examples shared from people if they've managed to produce something, because you might be sitting there having actually just done all your audiences and going, oh my God, I've got to think about this some more. So, or realising there's a whole heap of people you hadn't identified, or going, you know, and as I said before, this doesn't need to be a document that you need to publish or share with anyone else. It's just to help you become a Rosetta Stone of communication, where you can kind of switch that framing according to who you're talking to, so that whatever you're trying to get across is something that they're receptive to, rather than, you know, a frame that doesn't sort of work for them. So, you know, I've always said it's like you can't go up to someone who's doing a waltz, doing a salsa dance, and expect them to join you in the dance. You kind of got to start waltzing and then, you know, work in a few new steps there. So, yeah, it's going to be a big task. But yeah, if anybody has anything that they want to share, whether yourself or any of the people online, please feel free to go ahead, and we can sort of get a few examples from across the board. Don't feel like you've needed to complete it, but just if you've got anything to share as examples, as tangible examples, because that always helps people rather than abstraction. So yeah. Andrew, did you have something to share yet, or have you just got your audience list?
No, I do. I mean, I certainly am happy to start to get the ball rolling for everybody, but I'd love the opportunity for the cohort to share experiences or ask any questions that they have.
Yes, please go ahead, cohort.
So, yeah, I'm not sure who's there from Verge. Is it Elle and Tobias? Or haven't heard from Verge. From Chooks, I know Moira has been around, but I think she's travelling to the Flinders Ranges.
Okay.
Or anybody want to take the lead from Chooks and tell us what's going on in your world with this project, with this audience segmentation tool?
Can you hear me? No? Can you hear?
Struggling to hear you a bit.
Can anyone hear me?
Yep, that's better.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I've been having a whole lot of trouble with my sound. Haven't yet filled it out, more just watching what Andrew was doing, but yeah, already thinking of, I guess, the different players that will be involved for Chooks. You know, we'll probably have, you know, I guess government, business, individuals, social entrepreneurs. You know, we'll have a whole range of different stakeholders for Chooks, and yeah, certainly the messaging and the value propositions are going to be pretty different for each of those.
And I mean, even there, Amy, with things like government, even just in state government, because there's local and federal as well, depending on who you're engaging with, but state government, the different departments have got different cultures, and, you know, if you've got contacts in those departments, talk to them and find out, you know, how is this, how do I pitch this? It's a pitched thing, isn't it? So, you know, the interest of my agency, for example, you know, for me, I always have to think, how do I connect this to circular economy? How do I connect this to green industry? For another department like industry and skills, it's going to be something different again. They'll want to hear about employment. They'll want to hear about skills development, stuff like that. So under government, you could actually do that kind of subset like we did with post-growth to kind of really kind of get it nuanced and hone in on it, because yeah, I mean, I've had to learn this the hard way too, in knowing a little bit about the different cultures, even within a group, and, you know, talking to people there that they can help you with that. Or just sort of, even if you skulk around on the internet and look at their business plan and find out what their, you know, objectives are, there's always going to be some kind of document, and as long as you're kind of, I guess, tuned into that frequency and trying to get them on their own frequency, but aligned with what you're doing, then that's going to help you communicate to them more effectively, I guess. So, yeah.
No, that's great.
Hi folks, it's Moira here. I just wanted to, I am listening in. I had myself on mute. I've just pulled over. A couple of things too, I would, and maybe Amy or someone from there can just add this into our little Google Doc. But when I think about the co-op, from our perspective, the kind of members that will be in it are also our market segments. So I think about the stages of the development of a startup. So the audience segments for me are often early adopters, first followers, in our case, you know, women, and also then another segment are male champions. I'm actually
Absolutely
less interested in the institutional nature of audiences, so less interested in, say, government or industry, but really the qualities of the people who might want to support the mission. So that includes sort of, you know, investors as opposed to bankers, if that makes sense.
Yep.
People who have been already contributed to crowdfunding campaigns that we've all been a part of, or who have an interest in that methodology of fundraising. Other co-op members, people who are already in existing co-ops. You know, the feeling always is in building an audience is you go from the known to the unknown. So, for example, in our case, it might be having, you know, looking at RAA members. You know, women in RAA might be an audience segment.
Beautiful.
Women who perhaps have been donors to women's causes, or women, you know, everyone who's ever come to the tables at the International Women's Day, for example, Amy, we've got a list of those people. So that I'm really influenced by Seth Godin's work around marketing and audiences, and he talks about how we build, you know, we build products for our customers, not customers for our products. And so having a really good sense of who our communities are and who our potential members are first, rather than trying to get them to buy something, but we actually want them to buy something they want, and what we want them to buy is the idea of being in a co-op. So I hope that all makes sense.
Yeah. It really does, Maura, and I think that was a really valuable contribution to say, you know, because I guess I've kind of looked at groups of people, or perhaps, you know, not necessarily institutions, but yes, certainly like where people are at, like how far down the track with this are they? An early adopter compared to somebody that's just new to the idea is absolutely another way to kind of slice and dice this audience. And you know, this is great, because this is the kind of example that we can get from people to help all of our thinking, and you know, help all these ideas get traction in different ways for different people, depending on how far progressed they are through the thinking. And I mean, if you want to look at it, you know, to how, you know, early adopters versus perhaps people a little further way down the track, I guess that's what I did with the post-growth sheet, but sort of more, you know, who was closest to this issue, who's sort of further away. It's almost like concentric circles as well. You could think of it that way. So concentric circles is to who's actually close and allied, who's sort of interested, but we've got to find the right way to, I guess, you know, show how this connects to their interest, and then the people that are perhaps not so interested, but there might be some, you know, receptiveness there around certain issues. So that's really useful. I mean, I just thought of this concentric diagram now would be another way to kind of represent that graphically.
Yeah, that's certainly what you did in the post-growth matrix. And so I just really wanted to kind of add to that. So thanks, Sam. I really appreciate that, Sharon.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Anybody else from the cohort?
Yeah, if Valiant Plains, I saw both Brian and Rachel on earlier. Perhaps we could have something from you guys, because you'll be familiar with your audiences, but maybe not looked at the messaging so much.
We're familiar with what we thought was our. Now we're going to have to do some more thinking, aren't we?
That's the whole point of this, so that's great.
I'm an introverted thinker, so it's going to take me 24 to 48 hours to get on top of this. but the matrix is extremely valuable. So thanks so much for that. We'll certainly want to use this as we meet over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't know if we get a product out of this. I mean, we will use it and we will get something out of it. Is there any way in which that can be shared with others? That's
yeah, sure. Like, probably a question for Andrew, I'd imagine, but I imagine that would be like a great case study to come out of Incubator Co-op itself, that one of our cohort did this and therefore it becomes the template or a sort of example for others to look at.
Yeah.
What do you think, Woody?
Yeah, I would encourage you with, remember when we set up the technology for your community, be that a Slack channel or a Google Drive, and link that to your Incubator Co-op group. I would definitely keep this live sheet in your Google Drive if that's the way you're going to structure. And yeah, invite people to participate, and you can do that through your Incubator Co-op group and through your existing mediums, whether that's Facebook or Slack or Lumio, whatever the case may be for your organisation. So yes, put it in the centralised repository. I noticed that we also have Sam. Sam, you're at work, but are you able to talk from the loconomics perspective?
Hey, Wardy. Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Yeah, I've actually done audience segmentation before, so it's interesting to see people's responses to it. So what I did, as I told you before, I did a marketing course where we did audience segmentation, and then it is more like persona-based rather than actual individual sort of organizations that you want to market to, but I guess ends up being the same thing. So we've kind of got a start on that in our Google Drive for Loconomics. And then what we did after that is we looked at what channels we could communicate with those different audiences with, and then produced a content strategy for each of those channels and audience groups.
Wow.
Can I just unpack that with you for a bit, Sam? So you did audience segmentation from sort of customer archetypes, and then you added a channel, like if we added a column E and F to this spreadsheet, you had channel, and then what was the other?
So once you've got the channels that your audience like to communicate on, so email, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, you then create a content strategy where you go through 12 months or whatever of how you can engage those different audiences through those channels, and you say, like, you create a number of Facebook posts that you have lined up for whatever period, and then you can schedule those. And what they showed us in one of the lessons was to use a CRM, so HubSpot or whatever, so an accessible CRM, so not the Microsoft Dynamics or anything. So you use a CRM. So once people have signed up, then they're in your funnel, and your funnel is basically trying to move them through your content with using those channels to get to an end point where you get them to sign up or become engaged or something like that. So a lot of that stuff is then trackable through the CRM, ideally, so that what you're doing, you're not just reaching out to people blindly, you're kind of moving them along a path which you've predefined for your different audiences. So for Loconomics, it would be something like you're a service provider and you don't know anything about co-ops, and so you're very new to, so you're kind of like leading them. How do we approach it first? We need to educate them about co-ops and see how that applies to them. That might be one content strategy, or another audience member might be someone who works in co-ops that we want to come on board. We want to bring them on board to help us, to a bit like yourself, Fordy, bring them on board, educate them about the gig economy, what are the problems with the gig economy. So that's another content strategy. So you're kind of bringing the two groups together in a way. But I didn't actually do all of that. I don't have time, but at least I know. So that's like the marketing strategy. So that at least now I know if we do get funding, how do I talk to a marketing strategy person, and what do they need up front to, give them a head start in getting stuff done.
Thanks, Sam. That was really valuable.
Cool.
Is there anybody else? I noticed people like Alan, Greig are on, who may not have a current project in the cohort, but have wealth of experience. Is there anything you'd like to share, or any questions that you have for everybody?
All right, yeah, it's Alan Greig. I'm on the steering committee of the New Economy Network. One of the debates we have in that organisation is, how do we focus upwards to those that we really want to change? And working with sort of international organisations like the New Economy Coalition, their target group is actually, those that we want to really influence, and that's big energy, the tech giants, and the monopolies that control our supply chains. Now, how do we move from sort of the grassroots to the peak of the economies and get them to start considering that what we're saying and doing is valuable? And you've got platforms like, as much as people criticize them, like Davos and the G20 and things like that. But the co-op movement has been fairly effective in getting into some of the subcommittees and starting to sort of push the view that, there are alternative organizations that can achieve, viable ends differently and better. Maybe we've just got to up our sights a little bit. So the audience is, in fact, a different audience altogether, but it's an audience just the same.
Would you like to have a go at that, Sharon? Yeah, I think you're pretty successful in the terms of the New Economy Network, and you might have some experience to work our influence or the influence of things like the Post-Growth Institute or Fab City or any of the others that you're seeing. Are they influencing upwards, and how can we accelerate that?
Well, I know, for example, that Fab City have connections into IKEA, have connections into companies like Nike, and are starting to Maersk, the big shipping company. Why are you shipping stuff all over the planet? Why aren't you turning your container ships into floating fab labs? Why are you not sending the designs around the world and getting people to produce locally using a circular economy approach, capturing the materials that are already there? So, yes, they are. Post-growth is sort of more. It's an idea. It's building it's movement building as well. And I think you have to build a movement that particularly influencers like to jump in front of. But even at Davos, we've seen things like this idea of the young climate activist Greta getting up there and really taking it up to people in that forum, and another one that challenged income inequality the other day, and we've forgotten our history. So there's chinks in the armour even at those places, and I guess, and I happen to know that there's a group of people that are working on sort of post-growth stuff and they're influencers around Australia, and I happen to know that a former minister, who shall remain nameless, is part of that group, which I would never have imagined. So this is someone that can't say this publicly, but they are aware of it. And I guess the primary thing that I would like to see happen is how do we make these ideas safe for people in positions of influence to pursue, and how do they get status from it? How do they, why are we not talking about legacy rather than accumulation? I think we start to see some of those sorts of things. But the question of why are we looking at, all right, there's tax evasion and avoidance, and we need to redistribute more. What about pre-distribution, and where's the economic models, which is like cooperatives, that retain that value? So it's about finding the chinks in that dissonance within people there who are going, maybe this doesn't work so well anymore, but they need to have something to jump to, and they need a public literate in these ideas to say yes. And they, you know, we've got to have, I mean, this is again, politicians, their interest, if we're talking about politicians, their interest is in getting re-elected. You know, it's House of Cards. So what is going to be popular that's going to get them re-elected? We've seen things happening around this country in the last few weeks with the fish kills and fires and floods and heaven knows what, and there's a real sort of, you know, momentum building that we can't have a policy vacuum on climate change in this country anymore. And that's just come from sustained efforts by a whole bunch of different groups, plus a few, you know, extreme weather events all happening at once, that sort of brings that to the fore, I guess. So, and that's when you've got your opportunity to get in there and see some change happen. But if I had the answer to this, I would be in demand all around the world, so I don't pretend to have the answer to it. But yeah, the more you can show ideas that work, that aren't the business as usual that's got us into the trouble that we're in, get that understood by influencers, but also the people that they need to have on board with them, then I think you've got that opening, I guess, to start challenging, you know, the fact that we can't do what we've been doing anymore. So what next?
Thank you, everybody, and particularly Alan, for, you know, saying what I think is been a big disconnect. We are starting to get sophisticated in the co-op sector and adopt some better communication strategies, but we don't just need to talk to the converted. We need to be able to translate that into influence, and I guess that means being able to speak their language. I'm sorry, I don't know what that noise was, but on that note, I might suggest that we say thank you very much to Sharon. Sharon, have you any concluding remarks before I wind this up?
No, not really. Just hope that, you know, even if you've done the kind of segmentation exercises before, you've already been thinking about this, that there was something useful that came out of this for you. And certainly, if you already have, this is great, because there's already expertise within this small group that can be shared and help other people get better at it. And, you know, the stronger they are with their messaging and able to you know, be that, I guess, shapeshifter in terms of communication, the more effective you're going to be. And we need all your great ideas to be effective as possible. So good luck.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much for sharing this hour with us. For everybody else, tune in this time next week, and we are going to have a second webinar of this series. I think that's me on business planning, and the idea there will be around sharing critical pathways. So how do you very simply identify what your next steps are, and how we're going to be able to make use of the next 8 weeks and the tools that we have at Incubator Co-op in order to get your co-op developed. So thank you one and all for tuning in. This will be available on record as soon as possible. Thank you, and see you next week.
Hey, Wardy, could I just ask one thing before everyone goes?
Yes, sure, go for it.
Can you send this meeting out as a meeting request? Because I had trouble finding the Zoom link. I had to go onto the Incubator site and go onto a blog post, and I don't know, maybe I missed out on a meeting invite.
Yep, I certainly will. I'll put it in as a meeting request for the cohort, but it's also a public one, so they'll have to come through Incubator Co-op. Okay?
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Cool, mate. Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.